On the 2nd of May 1947, a 27-year-old woman walked out into a courtyard of a Czech prison, and she was led towards the execution pole. This was a 3-metre high wooden post, and the executioner and his assistant were waiting for her. The executioner in his hand had a rope, and he worked quickly to bring the life of the former female concentration camp guard to an end. Ruth Elfriede Hildner was known for being a brutal woman who worked inside many different terrible Nazi camps during World War II, and she was someone who was very feared by the inmates and prisoners of the camps where she worked. But at the end of the execution post, her life was brought to an end, and she was one of the only female concentration camp guards who were pole hanged at the end of World War II. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Ruth Elfriede Hildner was born on the 1st of November 1919 inside of Germany. As a teenager and a young woman, her life would have been influenced by the Nazis significantly, with the rise of Adolf Hitler to the position of the Führer. Hildner was most probably a member of the Nazi youth groups for women, such as the BDM or the League of German Maidens. In this group, young teenagers were subjected to a significant amount of indoctrination and brainwashing, and they were schooled in the Nazi policies for women. They were ordered to one day marry an SS man, and then have as many children for the Third Reich and Hitler as possible, and the young girls were told that their place was in the home. But eventually a number of young women were conscripted to go and work inside of the concentration camps. Around 1943 and 1944, there was an army of young women who went to train as female concentration camp guards, or Aufseherinnen as they were known. Typically these women were young women who had spent many years inside of the youth groups such as the League of German Maidens, and they were incredibly devoted to the Third Reich and the Nazi regime. Ruth Elfriede Hildner was conscripted to work in the concentration camps in July 1944 to patch up for the fact that many male guards had been sent to fight and repel the Soviet advancement in the east and the Allies who had invaded from Normandy. Hildner was sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp, an all-female site, and she was fast-tracked through training to become a female guard, and she was to begin with trained as a camp matron, as in someone who would work in the infirmary or the hospital. After a few weeks, the then 24-year-old Hildner was moved on to Dachau concentration camp. This was the first camp that opened inside the Third Reich, and Dachau was a terrible site of torture, slaughter and execution. Hildner here became a female overseer, and she switched from working as a matron in the infirmary to wield power and brutality over prisoners. She was then moved on to the Agfa Kammerwerke, a subcamp of Dachau, and she would then move on to serve in other subcamps too. In December 1944, she was sent to a tiny subcamp of Flossenburg, known as Helmbrechts. Whilst at this camp, Ruth gained a notorious and terrible reputation for herself, and the prisoners were scared of her violent nature. She regularly took weapons to the inmates, and battered them brutally if they did not work as hard as she wanted, and it's believed that she also killed many with her bare hands. She was most certainly a very dangerous woman, but let's remember she was in her mid-20s when she was demonstrating monstrous behaviour every single day. After remaining at Helmbrechts for around 5 months, in April 1945, with the Allies and in particular the US Army on the horizon, Helmbrechts was evacuated by the SS and the Nazis. The women were moved away quickly, and Hildner was one of a number of guards who oversaw the Death March, the forcible transfer of hundreds and thousands of prisoners from one site to another. Hildner on the Death March was involved in the beating and murder of a number of young girls who were killed as she took her baton and weapons to them. These women were too weak to walk, and Hildner was involved in the slaughter. She went with the group of prisoners to Zwodow, another subcamp of Flossenburg, actually found within Czechoslovakia. For many of the SS guards, male and female, they knew that the Second World War was coming to an end, and they also knew that they would be hunted at the end of the conflict for their crimes and actions. Ruth Hildner, after a number of days of being at Zwodow, realised this too, and she then fled the camp with a number of other female guards and overseers. There was at the time huge amounts of refugees fleeing and moving in and out of Czechoslovakia, and with this, the scores of people gave Hildner the perfect escape route to try and blend in and then hide. She managed to live out for just under 2 years inside of Czechoslovakia, and as the war had come to an end, Hildner kept looking over her shoulder. She knew that she was wanted and was being hunted, but Czech police in March 1947 identified her, and with this she was arrested and was then put into prison. It's not known why the former female guard did not make an attempt to travel back into Germany or German lands. She may have believed it was more dangerous for her to do this, and that she may have risked capture. In May 1947, Ruth Hildner was brought to the Extraordinary People's Court in Písek in Czechoslovakia, and her trial took place. The courtroom heard from many people who were locked up inside of the Nazi concentration camp systems and the specific camp where Ruth Hildner worked, and they testified about the brutal guard that she truly was. Because of this, the courtroom judges were very shocked, and they wondered how a woman who was in her early 20s could have such a terrible history of violence, sadism and murder, despite the fact she'd only worked at the camp for roughly over a year. With all of the evidence that was heard, Hildner was sentenced to death after being found guilty of war crimes, and she was then taken to a prison nearby for her execution to be carried out. She was actually executed on the very same day that she was condemned and found guilty. Inside of Písek prison's courtyard, there were a number of execution posts, and Ruth Hildner, being tried in Czechoslovakia, was to be pole-hanged. This method, it was believed and claimed, could be quicker than using a gallows to bring about death. Hildner was led up to the 3-metre post, and her execution followed this process. Firstly, she was placed near to the pole, and a rope was attached around her feet, and it was then passed for a pulley at the bottom of the pole. Ruth was then hoisted to the top of the pole, and a chest sling around her middle secured her off the ground, holding her in place. Then a noose was looped around her neck, and this was placed over a hook, and the executioner and his assistant then got ready. They released the chest sling, and the executioner had his hand under Ruth's neck and tried to force her head to one side to dislocate her neck, but as she plunged downwards, the noose snapped taut around her neck, and the executioner's assistant also guided her fall. Ruth Elfriede Hildner was executed on the execution pole or post, and she was someone who had a very dark history inside the concentration camps. She had been serving within the sites for roughly a year, but during this time, Hildner developed a reputation for herself, which was brutal and barbaric, and she was known to have inflicted terror, especially upon female prisoners, every single day. For this she paid the ultimate price and was executed inside a dark Czech prison. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.